The Florida Everglades is a place of primordial silence, a vast river of grass where the line between the earth and the water disappears. In the dead of night, the swamp is a black mirror, reflecting nothing but the cold, distant stars and the secrets buried beneath the muck. On December 29, 1972, that silence was shattered by the scream of jet engines and the sound of a massive vessel tearing into the earth. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a Lockheed L-1011, was descending toward Miami International Airport when it simply vanished from the radar screens. A tiny light on the instrument panel, a landing gear indicator, had failed to illuminate, distracting the flight crew in the darkened cockpit. While the men focused on a burnt-out bulb, the autopilot was inadvertently disconnected, and the giant aircraft began a slow, silent glide into the abyss. The impact was not a sudden explosion, but a violent disintegration as the plane skipped across the shallow water and the sharp sawgrass. 101 souls were lost that night, their lives extinguished in the black, humid heart of the Florida wilderness. But for those who survived and for the investigators who picked through the wreckage, the horror of Flight 401 was only the beginning of the story. In the months following the crash, Eastern Airlines made a decision that would inadvertently bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Maintenance crews salvaged various parts from the downed L-1011, components that had miraculously survived the impact in the corrosive swamp water. These parts, including ovens, storage lockers, and electronic units, were refurbished and installed into other aircraft within the Eastern Airlines fleet. Soon after these recycled parts were put back into service, the atmosphere within the airline began to shift from professional to paranoid. Flight attendants and pilots began to report strange occurrences, a heavy oppressive feeling that they were not alone in the galley or the cockpit. The reports were consistent, chilling, and came from seasoned professionals who had no reason to manufacture stories of the supernatural. They spoke of cold spots that would manifest in the pressurized cabins and the unmistakable scent of old cigarette smoke where none should exist. It wasn't long before the sightings became more than just sensations, as figures began to appear in the reflective surfaces of the aircraft windows. Multiple employees reported seeing a man in a formal Eastern Airlines uniform sitting in the passenger cabin, looking out at the clouds with a hollow gaze. When approached, the figure would simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread and a drop in the temperature. The descriptions were always identical: a man with a pale, serious face who bore an uncanny resemblance to Bob Loft, the captain of Flight 401. Captain Loft had died in the wreckage of the Everglades, yet he seemed to be tethered to the machinery that had been salvaged from his final flight. He was not alone, as reports soon began to include sightings of Don Rappeau, the flight engineer who had also perished in the disaster. Rappeau was often seen in the lower galleys or the electronics bays, appearing to perform maintenance checks on the very planes that carried pieces of his ghost. These were not vengeful spirits, but echoes of men who felt their duty to the passengers and the aircraft had not yet been fulfilled. Have you ever stopped to think that the videos you just watched, with flawless scripts and engaging narrations, might have been created by someone who never even touched a camera or a microphone? There is a new digital elite profiting heavily behind the scenes of YouTube and social media, building massive channels without ever showing their faces or spending thousands of dollars on equipment. While most people are frozen by the fear of being on camera, these individuals are using the hidden power of artificial intelligence to generate automated content that works and earns for them 24 hours a day. The secret to dominating this game isn't about having a famous face. It's about knowing how to command the right tools to create scripts, voices, and visuals that magnetically hold the audience's attention. I've gained access to a strategic method that reveals the exact roadmap for you to build your own invisible digital empire. Mastering AI to turn clicks into a real source of income. It is the perfect opportunity for those seeking financial and geographical freedom without having to deal with the pressure of being a public figure on the internet. Best of all, you can seize this opportunity right now for a symbolic price. The complete training is under an exclusive promotion, dropping from $97 to just $17. This is your passport to unlocking the knowledge you need to start your professional journey with AI today. Click the first link in the description to secure your spot while this discount is still active. In one documented instance, a flight attendant opened an oven door only to see the reflection of Don Rappeau's face staring back from the glass. He reportedly spoke to her, warning of a potential electrical fire before fading into the gray metal of the compartment without a trace. The airline management, fearing for their reputation, took extreme measures to suppress these accounts and keep the public in the dark. Employees were threatened with termination if they spoke of the ghosts, and logs containing these reports were allegedly confiscated or destroyed. Yet, the stories continued to leak through the ranks, whispered in the crew lounges and the dark corners of the hangars during the midnight shifts. Pilots would find Rappeau sitting in the observer's seat, his translucent hands moving over the controls as if he were still monitoring the systems. The terror was not one of violence, but of the impossible presence of the dead within the high-tech environment of a modern jetliner. It was a haunting of the machine, a spiritual infection that seemed to travel wherever the salvaged parts of Flight 401 were installed. Mechanics reported hearing rhythmic tapping coming from inside the walls of the aircraft, a sound that matched the Morse code used by engineers. When they opened the panels, they found nothing but the cold wires and the salvaged components from the Everglades crash site. One captain was reportedly confronted by the spirit of Bob Loft in the first-class cabin, who told him, "You will never have to worry about a crash." It was a comforting message delivered from beyond the grave. Yet it left the living pilot trembling with a fear that no training could resolve. The presence of the dead became so pervasive that some crews refused to fly on specific aircraft, known within the company as the haunted planes. They felt the weight of the tragedy pressing down on them every time the cabin doors were sealed for a long-haul flight across the coast. The Everglades had claimed the bodies, but it seemed the sky was forced to carry the souls of those who could not find their way home. The pieces of metal had become vessels for the memories and the shadows of a night that was never supposed to happen in Florida. As the fleet continued to operate, the boundary between the physical world and the afterlife became increasingly blurred for those who flew. They were no longer just transporting passengers. They were navigating a graveyard that moved at 500 miles per hour through the night sky. The silence of the swamp had followed them into the air, a reminder that some things are not meant to be salvaged or reused by the living. The ghosts of Flight 401 had become permanent passengers, forever circling the Florida coast in a cycle of duty and despair. Now, decades later, the question remains whether the spirits were truly laid to rest or if they still inhabit the forgotten metal of that fleet. The legend of Flight 401 began to grow beyond the confines of the airline, becoming a dark piece of American folklore that terrified the public. Even as the airline denied the sightings, the internal culture of Eastern Airlines was being hollowed out by the persistent presence of the lost crew. Don Repo's ghost seemed particularly active in the technical spaces, as if he were trying to prevent the very distraction that had led to his death. He was once seen by a technician working on a malfunctioning system. The ghost pointed directly at the fault before vanishing into thin air. The fear among the staff was no longer about the crash itself, but about the implications of a soul being trapped within a piece of hardware. It suggested that the trauma of a sudden death could leave a permanent imprint on the physical objects that surrounded the victim at the end. This was a haunting of the industrial age, where the spirit was not bound to a house, but to the aluminum and wires of a machine. Every time a part from Flight 401 was moved to a new aircraft, the sightings would follow, spreading the hauntings across the entire fleet. The ghost parts became a dark currency of rumor, with crews secretly tracking which serial numbers belonged to the ill-fated Lockheed L1011. They looked for the telltale signs of a haunting, flickering lights, unexplained whispers, and the sudden feeling of being watched from behind. In the late 1970s, the sightings became so frequent that a high-ranking executive was allegedly confronted by the spirit of Don Repo. The ghost warned the executive about a flaw in the plane's systems, a warning that was reportedly verified by the maintenance team later. Despite the helpful nature of the spirits, the psychological toll on the employees was immense, leading to a climate of exhaustion and dread. They were working in a space where the dead were more attentive than the living, a paradox that made the act of flying feel macabre. The airline eventually began to quietly remove the salvaged parts, realizing that the cost of the hauntings was far higher than the value of the metal. They were stripped from the airframes and supposedly buried or destroyed in an attempt to finally lay the spirits of Loft and Repo to rest. But even after the parts were gone, the stories lingered, a phantom limb of an airline that was already beginning its slow financial ruin. Some believed that the spirits hadn't left the planes, but had merely moved into the collective memory of everyone who had served on them. The crash in the Everglades was a wound that would not heal, a scar on the Florida landscape that continued to bleed into the modern world. The sawgrass still holds the echoes of that night, and some say that if you stand in the swamp at the right time, you hear engines. The haunting of Flight 401 serves as a grim reminder that we do not truly own the things we build. We only borrow them from the dark. When we try to reclaim pieces of a tragedy, we often bring back more than just metal. We bring back the shadows of the lost. The Eastern Airlines fleet eventually aged out and was sold or scrapped, the haunted planes being dismantled in desert graveyards far away. Yet, the accounts remain in the journals and the memories of the men and women who flew the haunted skies of the 70s and 80s. It is a story that defies the sterile world of aviation, proving that even in technical environments, the human spirit refuses to be ignored. The ghosts were not looking for revenge. They were simply trying to finish the flight they started on that cold December night in 1972. The Florida Everglades remains a place of mystery, a dark expanse that swallows whatever falls into its depths and occasionally spits back a soul. The tragedy of Flight 401 is more than just a crash. It is a testament to the enduring nature of duty and the lingering power of death. We look to the sky and see the lights of passing planes, rarely thinking of the men who might still be sitting in the cockpits tonight. The ghosts of Miami are not always in the graveyards. Sometimes, they are 30,000 feet above us, watching the instrument panels. As the years pass, the names of Loft and Repo fade from the headlines, but they remain etched into the dark history of the Sunshine State. They are the eternal flight crew, the guardians of the recycled parts, and the reminders of a price paid in the black water of the swamp. The silence of the Everglades is heavy, a weight that presses down on anyone who dares to go looking for the wreckage of the deep past. Some things are better left buried in the mud, away from the living and the machines they use to conquer the clouds in the sky. The sky is a vast and lonely place, and for the crew of Flight 401, the journey never truly ended. It just changed its physical form. They are the shadows in the galley, the whispers in the headset, and the cold breath on the back of a pilot's neck during a night flight. Every flight has a beginning and an end, but for some, the destination is a place between worlds, a permanent orbit around a tragedy. The story of the haunted parts is a warning to those who think they can outrun the past or recycle the remnants of a nightmare. Florida is a land built on the bones of the old world, and sometimes those bones refuse to stay quiet, especially when they are made of steel. The ghosts of the Everglades are still out there, flying the routes they knew by heart, forever waiting for the landing gear light to turn green. The legacy of Flight 401 remains a haunting chapter in aviation history, proving that the dead never truly abandoned their posts or their duty. Even today, in the quiet hangars of South Florida, mechanics speak of the cold air that follows the movement of old Eastern Airlines equipment. The swamp remains indifferent, a silent witness to the souls that continue to roam the sky, forever searching for a runway that no longer exists. Please leave a comment below if you have ever felt an unexplained presence while flying, or if you remember the legend of the haunted flight 401. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss another deep dive into the most disturbing and dark chronicles of American history. If this investigation into the ghosts of the Everglades chilled you, please leave a like to help us continue sharing these macabre secrets.